In the autumn of 1942, specifically October, high above the rugged terrain of Tunisia, a protective echelon of P-38 Lightnings was accompanying a fleet of B-17 bombers at an elevation of 25,000 feet, when German Bf-109gs descended with blinding speed from the sun's glare. The American airmen thrust their throttles to their forward stops, desperately attempting to ascend and confront the impending menace. Their twin Allison V-1710 power plants thrummed with a deep, powerful resonance, yet a critical malfunction was evident. The P-38s struggled laboriously upward, as if burdened by unseen anchors. The Messerschmitts, by stark contrast, ascended with the effortless grace of angels yearning for celestial return, swiftly positioning themselves for a subsequent attack run. By the time the Lightnings had managed to gain a mere 2,000 feet of altitude, the enemy 109s had already climbed an additional 4,000 feet. This was not a fair engagement. It was a tragic inevitability, an aerial slaughter poised to unfold. This grievous episode was far from a singular occurrence. From the arid battlegrounds of North Africa to the sprawling European theater, P-38 pilots were reiterating identical grievances throughout the latter half of 1942 and early 1943. The Lightning was heralded as the United States' definitive response to every aerial challenge the Axis powers could present. Its dual engines promised inherent resilience, its formidable offensive capabilities were well documented, and it boasted ample velocity in level flight. On paper, its specifications rendered it seemingly insurmountable. In practical application, however, particularly above 20,000 feet, it labored with an acute respiratory distress, as if suffering from emphysema. Airmen consistently reported hesitant power delivery from the throttle, a deficient ascent velocity, and power plants that felt as though they were struggling for vital atmospheric intake. In the unforgiving ballet of a dogfight, where altitude frequently equates to survival, such performance deficiencies constituted a terminal pronouncement. The Army Air Forces were acutely cognizant of a significant operational deficiency. Reconnaissance data corroborated that the newest iterations of German fighter aircraft, specifically the Bf-109G and the FW-190A, were surpassing American aircraft in vertical ascent capability at the crucial altitudes where bomber escorts needed to operate effectively. The P-38 program was sustaining grievous personnel losses, suffering defeats in encounters it was designed to command. Engineers situated at Lockheed's Burbank facility were privy to the grievances, yet the Lightning had successfully passed all its rigorous qualification assessments. The aerodynamic and mechanical blueprints were fundamentally robust, the superchargers were functioning precisely according to specifications, and any alterations would necessitate an arduous, protracted bureaucratic process through official channels, consuming many months. Concurrently, valuable airmen were perishing. What the prevailing consensus had yet to grasp was that the ultimate solution would not originate within the hallowed halls of Lockheed's engineering department, nor from the stringent evaluation centers of Wright Field. It would not materialize from meticulous aerodynamic simulations derived from wind tunnel data or exhaustive algorithmic scrutiny. The pivotal answer was destined to emerge from an individual whose hands bore the indelible marks of practical labor, a man willing to disregard prescribed operational doctrines, and instead heed the nuanced mechanical language of the aircraft's power plants. In the unforgiving crucible of wartime, the exigencies of conflict often transform ordinary tools into instruments of strategic advantage. And it is frequently the case that groundbreaking advancements stem from those unburdened by preconceived notions of limitation. The P-38's persistent high-altitude problem was about to encounter a mechanic who harbored no faith in the concept of insurmountable obstacles. His specific designation has since been consigned to the quiet obscurity that envelopes the vast majority of non-commissioned personnel. Nevertheless, his squadron mates in North Africa recognized him as the singular individual capable of coaxing life back into ailing power plants. He held the rank of staff sergeant, an individual perhaps 30 years of age, assigned to a P-38 squadron that had been suffering severe attrition in the skies above Tunisia in early 1943. Prior to the commencement of hostilities, he had plied his trade in motor vehicle repair establishments, the kind of workshops where one inherently learned to improvise solutions with available resources because the clientele could not afford brand new components. That resourceful, depression-forged pragmatism, that make it work mentality, was on the verge of fundamentally altering the dynamics of air combat. The mechanic spent his laborious days immersed in the intricate mechanics of the Allison V-1710 power plants, and in doing so, he began perceiving a recurring anomaly. Airmen consistently returned from high-altitude sorties reporting a significant diminution of engine thrust above 22,000 feet. He would diligently run the engines on the ground, meticulously checking the supercharger boost pressures and examining the intercoolers, every single component registered as fully compliant with established parameters. However, he discerned, these specifications had been meticulously penned for benign, low-altitude environments in Burbank, California, not for arduous operational deployments in the scorching North African heat, where the surrounding atmospheric heat could soar to an oppressive 110 degrees Fahrenheit on the airfield surface. He commenced meticulously scrutinizing the Lightning's intricate air intake apparatus, with a focused determination born of personal loss and urgent necessity. The P-38 utilized a turbo-supercharger system that was truly ingenious in its conception. Expelled combustion products propelled a rotary compressor that densified the atmospheric intake, thereby injecting a greater volumetric concentration of oxygen into the combustion chambers at altitude. This compressed air, however, became intensely hot, necessitating its passage through heat exchange units, or intercoolers, before entering the engine. These intercoolers were theoretically designed to mitigate the thermal energy of the compressed air by directing it via chambers where ambient, less heated air circulated externally to the passages. Conceptually elegant, this design appeared flawless. Yet, in the oppressive heat of the North African operational zone, those intercoolers were attempting to cool 300-degree compressed air with 100-degree ambient air. The thermal gradient proved insufficient. The air entering the cylinders remained excessively hot, diminishing its molecular compactness and severely inhibiting engine performance. However, here was the critical detail that the mechanic identified, a nuance that had eluded the attention of all others. The intercooler ducting was equipped with modulable outflow apertures, which were governed by a temperature-sensitive regulating mechanism, a thermostatic valve. The entire system had been engineered to preserve a defined thermal envelope, but that range had been precisely tuned for temperate operational environments. In the crucible of combat, airmen urgently required unrestricted thermal dissipation, not merely automated temperature equilibrium. He began to ponder. What if one were to circumvent the automated thermal regulation and mechanically fix those intercooler outflow apertures to their fully open position? What if one were simply to inundate the heat exchanger compartments with the greatest possible volume of ambient air that physics would allow? Disregard the meticulously established parameters. The engineering manual unequivocally stated, "Do not tamper with this system." The technical orders were explicit regarding the preservation of original factory configurations, but this mechanic possessed an alternative, unwritten doctrine, the one composed by airmen who repeatedly returned with perforated airframes and harrowing accounts of superior German aerial ascent capabilities. Sometimes, the most impactful innovations frequently materialize when conventional authorization is foregone. The thermostatic valve represented the critical constriction that official channels were reluctant to acknowledge. Lockheed's engineers had designed it primarily to safeguard the power plants against abrupt thermal variations, the underlying premise being that precipitous shifts in temperature might induce catastrophic failures, such as fractured cylinder heads or deformed mechanical parts. Thus, the valve regulated the passage of cooling air through the intercoolers to keep temperatures within a secure and anticipated operational envelope, a prudent, risk-averse design methodology, the kind that assuages legal concerns and minimizes post-sale liabilities. The mechanic, however, perceived the situation through an alternative lens. Those engines were not succumbing to sudden thermal stress. They were, in fact, incapable of delivering requisite thrust during critical combat exigencies, and lives were being forfeited due to an overabundance of cautious design. He selected a P-38 undergoing standard servicing procedures, and immediately commenced his modifications. The intercooler exit doors were tensioned by internal springs and governed by the aforementioned temperature sensing regulator, which detected thermal fluctuations and modulated its action in response. He completely circumvented the automatic control mechanism, securing the outflow apertures in their maximally extended configuration so that an unhindered torrent of cooling air would perpetually traverse the intercooler heat exchange matrices. Subsequently, he undertook another measure that would cause considerable discomfort among conventional engineering practitioners. The intercooler ducts contained internal flow-constricting vanes, or baffles, originally designed to guarantee uniform atmospheric circulation across the cooling surfaces. He excised certain elements of these internal structures, thereby enlarging the passage for atmospheric current. The result was enhanced volumetric flow, diminished impedance, and optimal thermal dissipation. It was the direct mechanical analog to disengaging an engine speed limiter, unrefined, fraught with potential hazards, and yet precisely the radical intervention necessitated by the prevailing circumstances. The crucial evaluative sortie transpired on a crisp February morning in 1943. The airman at the controls was a lieutenant, a veteran of 2 previous aerial engagements resulting in significant damage to his aircraft, and thus possessed a profound sense of fatalism, having seemingly nothing left to lose. He ascended with the specially adapted lightning, and at 5,000 feet, the engine's thermal readings appeared within expected parameters. At 10,000 feet, performance continued to exhibit satisfactory operation. At 15,000 feet, where operational difficulties typically manifested, the cylinder head thermal readings registered a full 20 degrees Fahrenheit below those of unmodified P-38s. At 20,000 feet, where most lightnings began to exhibit labored performance, this particular aircraft maintained a robust, unyielding manifold pressure. The pilot urged the aircraft to 25,000 feet, subsequently extending its ascent to 28,000 feet. The power plants hummed with newfound vigor and efficiency. He transmitted via radio communication that the vertical ascent velocity felt as though additional motive power had been affixed to the airframe. The aircraft was achieving operational height with unparalleled swiftness compared to anything he had previously commanded. When he landed, a throng of expectant personnel had gathered. Whispers had circulated through the maintenance crews that a significant departure from the norm was unfolding. The pilot disembarked with a broad, triumphant smile, and uttered a concise declaration that would fundamentally alter the aircraft's operational paradigm. "She climbs like a homesick angel." The mechanic meticulously inspected the ignition electrodes, assessed the volumetric efficiency of the combustion chambers, and scanned for any indications of heat-induced degradation. No adverse findings were present. The power plants were operating with complete satisfaction. Reduced intake air temperatures translated directly to a higher air density. This more compact air supplied an increased quantity of oxygen for each combustion cycle. The augmented oxygen content naturally yielded greater engine output. It was a matter of fundamental principles of thermal energy transfer, a concept readily comprehensible to students of introductory physics. But it had required the audacious initiative of a field mechanic, prepared to disregard official directives, to translate this theoretical understanding into practical, operational reality. In a remarkably short span of 7 days, each P-38 within the squadron's complement underwent the critical alteration as part of its scheduled servicing procedures. Airmen began specifically soliciting aircraft by their identification numbers, explicitly demanding the high-performance, hot rods, equipped with the enhanced intercooler systems. The commanding officer of the squadron faced a profound and unenviable choice. On one hand, he had unauthorized operational alterations being implemented without sanctioned approval, the kind of deviation that could precipitate professional ruin should any disastrous malfunction occur. On the other hand, he possessed operational dispatches demonstrating that his augmented P-38s had abruptly achieved a formidable competitive edge at altitudes where they had been utterly vulnerable targets merely a fortnight prior. He was a seasoned lieutenant colonel, a veteran of aerial combat during the Great War, and he possessed an intuitive grasp of a fundamental truth frequently overlooked by peacetime administrative officials. In the crucible of conflict, the most efficacious remedy is that which delivers immediate results, rather than an idealized perfection that materializes with debilitating delay. The critical solution, regrettably, arrived 6 months too late for some early engagements. The resourceful mechanic, having successfully implemented his ingenious field modification, diligently dispatched a comprehensive report detailing the alteration and its remarkable outcomes to 5th Air Force Headquarters. The official reply, while tinged with a cautious optimism regarding the potential, was nonetheless heavily constrained by bureaucratic protocols. It stipulated, "Continue testing, document everything, but do not implement fleet-wide without proper engineering review." This amounted to an official deferral, essentially translating to, "Perhaps at a later date." However, the truly significant response, the one that profoundly impacted operational realities, emerged from the field itself. Frontline commanders, recognizing the immediate and tangible benefits, began discreetly sanctioning the modification for their respective squadrons. Word of this highly effective improvement circulated rapidly. A discerning captain commanding a different P-38 unit, upon learning of the innovation, promptly dispatched his maintenance chief to observe the procedure firsthand. He then returned to his own base to adapt his unit's aircraft accordingly. Consequently, by the spring of March 1943, an increasing number of these enhanced Lightnings were making their operational debut across the North African theater, and the German Luftwaffe was perceptibly beginning to register a significant shift in their adversaries' performance capabilities. Concurrently, at the esteemed Wright Field in Ohio, the Army Air Force engineers were engaged in their own endeavors to tackle this identical performance conundrum, albeit through meticulously established official channels. They had, in due course, acknowledged the persistent complaints regarding altitude performance deficiencies, and had subsequently initiated a rigorous, systematic testing program. This comprehensive undertaking encompassed intricate wind tunnel tests, detailed temperature mapping studies, and sophisticated computational analysis of airflow dynamics within the intercooler ducts. It was a commendable display of sound scientific principles and proper methodological application, yet its progress was inherently dictated by the measured pace characteristic of peacetime engineering review processes. Their initial findings, formally unveiled in April 1943, indicated that a significant enhancement in intercooler efficiency could be achieved through the implementation of redesigned ducting and a precise recalibration of the thermostatic valve. The projected timeline for this implementation was estimated to be a substantial 8 to 12 months, necessitating the production of specialized modification kits by Lockheed and their subsequent distribution via established depot-level maintenance facilities. In stark contrast, the pragmatic solution devised by the field mechanic was already actively deployed and operational on scores of aircraft, requiring approximately 4 hours per plane to complete, utilizing only readily available standard tools. This ingenious fix demanded no proprietary components, no direct factory assistance, nor any intricate engineering blueprints, relying instead on a profound, hands-on comprehension of the engine's fundamental requirements. This stark divergence in progress inevitably engendered an exceedingly awkward predicament, precisely the kind that military bureaucracies inherently abhor: undeniable evidence that established official processes were being decisively outmaneuvered and surpassed by the ingenuity of practical individuals wielding mere wrenches. Understandably, certain engineering officers voiced strong objections, raising legitimate concerns that these unauthorized modifications could potentially invalidate crucial technical compliance certifications and, moreover, generate significant maintenance headaches in the long term. Their apprehensions were not entirely unfounded. Indeed, the principle of standardization is upheld for very valid operational reasons, and impromptu field modifications possess the distinct potential to precipitate severe logistical nightmares, especially when attempting to provide comprehensive support for hundreds of aircraft deployed across disparate operational theaters. However, the relentless demands of active combat possess an unparalleled capacity for definitively resolving arguments that might otherwise remain perpetually mired in unresolved peacetime debates and theoretical discussions. As late spring of 1943 progressed, a critical mass of modified P-38s had accumulated sufficient operational flight hours and combat sorties, consistently demonstrating measurably superior performance, which ultimately caused the entrenched resistance to the field modification to begin perceptibly crumbling. The empirical data, meticulously compiled from these missions, proved utterly undeniable in its compelling veracity. Notably, climb rates exhibited a significant improvement, registering an increase of 12 to 15% at higher altitudes. Crucially, engine temperatures consistently remained well within acceptable and safe operational limits, and perhaps most importantly, not a single catastrophic engine failure directly attributable to the modification had been recorded. Even the 8th Air Force, stationed in England, began proactively requesting detailed information regarding this remarkable alteration. The definitive validation for the modification arrived in the form of compelling mission reports, narratives of aerial combat that, to those accustomed to the P-38's previous limitations, read almost like fantastical accounts. A particularly illustrative incident occurred on April 18, 1943, when a formation of modified P-38s, belonging to the elite 1st Fighter Group, successfully intercepted a contingent of German Ju-88 bombers high above the azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea at an impressive altitude of 26,000 feet. The astute Lightning Flight leader, upon visually acquiring the enemy formation, promptly issued the command to initiate a formidable attack. With remarkable alacrity, his pilots ascended a further 3,000 feet in less than 2 minutes, expertly positioning themselves for a devastating diving pass. The German aircrews, having grown accustomed to the P-38's historical difficulties and comparative sluggishness at such extreme altitudes, were utterly unprepared for the Americans to achieve an advantageous attack position with such astonishing swiftness. The result was swift and decisive. 3 Ju-88s were sent plummeting earthward in fiery wreckage before their protective escort could even begin to mount a meaningful defense. The subsequent after-action report, submitted by the victorious squadron, explicitly highlighted these exceptional results, stating with unequivocal clarity, "Aircraft exhibited superior climb performance. Modification appears effective in combat conditions." A further compelling demonstration of the modification's impact unfolded over the skies of Tunisia in May 1943, when modified P-38s from the distinguished 82nd Fighter Group engaged in a ferocious aerial skirmish with formidable Bf-109gs at a breathtaking altitude of 28,000 feet. During this intense encounter, a brave American pilot, a first lieutenant hailing from Michigan, discovered himself locked in a perilous climbing scissors maneuver against an acknowledged German ace. In the context of the older, unmodified P-38s, such a maneuver against a Bf-109G at high altitude would have been tantamount to committing suicide. The nimble 109 would have effortlessly disengaged and gained the advantage in a vertical fight. Yet, the enhanced Lightning, defying previous limitations, tenaciously clung to the Messerschmitt, matching its every turn and ascent with astonishing parity. The German pilot, undoubtedly bewildered by the unexpected performance of his adversary, and perhaps misjudging the capabilities of what he believed to be a standard P-38, made a critical tactical error by attempting to extend vertically. The P-38, however, remained relentlessly on his tail, and the lieutenant delivered a precise 3-second burst of gunfire directly into the 109's engine. The Messerschmitt disintegrated violently at an astonishing 31,000 feet. The dramatic gun camera footage capturing this decisive victory rapidly circulated, becoming mandatory viewing for every fighter squadron operating in the theater, serving as irrefutable proof of the P-38's newfound aerial prowess. As these anecdotal accounts of triumph accumulated, so too did a body of compelling statistical data, generating considerable discomfort among the remaining skeptics. Between the months of March and June 1943, squadrons operating the now modified P-38s reported a remarkable 42% decrease in aircraft losses, specifically during critical high-altitude bomber escort missions, a stark improvement when contrasted with the preceding 3-month operational period. This significant reduction was largely attributable to the fact that pilots were now empowered to engage enemy aircraft and disengage from combat on their own advantageous terms, rather than being defensively forced into unwinnable engagements. Furthermore, these enhanced Lightnings were consistently achieving their optimal operational altitude of 30,000 feet, a substantial 4 to 6 minutes faster than their unmodified, stock counterparts. In the frenetic, life-or-death calculus of an aerial dogfight, a difference of 4 minutes could be as strategically decisive as 4 hours. This newfound agility fundamentally transmuted the P-38's role, allowing its pilots to become the assertive hunter rather than the vulnerable hunted. Inevitably, the formidable Luftwaffe began to take notice of this palpable shift in aerial dynamics. German intelligence reports, meticulously compiled from mid-1943 and subsequently recovered after the cessation of hostilities, explicitly documented observations that American P-38s were demonstrating markedly superior performance at high altitudes compared to what their prior encounters had indicated. One particularly telling anecdote emerged from a Luftwaffe pilot, who, following his capture after being shot down in June, candidly informed his interrogators that, based on the astonishing climb rate of his adversary, he had genuinely believed he was engaged in combat with the more robust P-47 Thunderbolts. The revelation that his opponent had, in fact, been a Lightning left him utterly astonished. This profound psychological impact on enemy morale and perception proved nearly as significant as the tangible tactical advantages gained. German pilots, who had previously grown somewhat complacent and comfortable with the perceived limitations of the P-38, were now abruptly compelled to acknowledge and respect it as a legitimate and formidable high-altitude threat. By the onset of summer 1943, the profoundly impactful modification had acquired an unofficial but widely recognized moniker among the discerning flight crews: the White Lightning upgrade. This evocative name cleverly alluded to two distinct characteristics. First, the P-38's distinctive natural metal finish, which gleamed brightly in the sunlight, and second, the potent, almost illicit, moonshine-like kick of enhanced power and performance it imparted to the aircraft's engines. Experienced pilots, who had the unique opportunity to operate both the unmodified and the newly configured Lightnings, invariably characterized the difference as being as stark and undeniable as night and day. A particularly vivid testament came from a captain serving with the distinguished 14th Fighter Group, who, in a candid interview with a reporter, eloquently articulated that reverting to flying a standard stock P-38 after experiencing the exhilaration of the modification was akin to the jarring sensation of returning to operate a cumbersome truck after having become thoroughly accustomed to the effortless agility and raw power of a high-performance sports car. Lockheed's dedicated engineers, based at their renowned Burbank facility, finally managed to acquire a field-modified P-38 for thorough examination in June 1943. Their subsequent analysis of the aircraft elicited a complex and often contradictory mixture of profound admiration and professional horror. Admiration stemmed from the undeniable fact that the ingenious modification functioned precisely as its proponents had enthusiastically advertised, delivering tangible and significant performance improvements. Conversely, horror arose from the realization that this ad hoc alteration flagrantly violated approximately 15 distinct design protocols and had been executed with what one incredulous engineer somewhat wryly characterized as aggressive simplification. The specific details, such as the bypass thermostatic valve, the strategically removed baffles, and the intercooler doors deliberately fixed in an open position, collectively generated considerable apprehension among the more theoretically inclined engineers. Nevertheless, the rigorous test data, impartially gathered, simply could not be disputed. Subsequent dynamometer runs unequivocally demonstrated a substantial 12% increase in power output at a demanding altitude of 25,000 feet when compared to the aircraft's standard configuration. Furthermore, critical temperature margins consistently remained well within acceptable and safe operational limits, even when subjected to sustained periods of high power settings. The esteemed company now confronted an undeniably uncomfortable and humbling reality. Their sophisticated product, the P-38 Lightning, was in fact being significantly improved and optimized in the demanding environment of the field, not by their highly trained engineers, but by practical mechanics who had, in all likelihood, never even laid eyes on an official engineering blueprint. This revelation undoubtedly inflicted a considerable blow to professional pride within the organization. However, Lockheed's far-sighted leadership merits profound credit for their subsequent actions. Demonstrating remarkable humility and strategic foresight, they commendably swallowed that pride and immediately redirected their efforts towards practical implementation. By July 1943, dedicated engineering teams were intensely engaged in meticulously analyzing the precise mechanisms by which the field modification achieved its efficacy and, crucially, how to properly integrate this proven enhancement across the entire production line. Their exhaustive research ultimately validated what the ingenious mechanic had discerned through sheer intuition and practical experience. The original intercooler system had been excessively over-engineered, designed with safety margins that, while theoretically sound, proved entirely superfluous and indeed detrimental in the crucible of actual combat operations. The thermostatic valve, in particular, was found to be diligently safeguarding against largely theoretical and improbable issues, whilst inadvertently generating tangible, real-world performance deficiencies. The highly anticipated P-38J model, which officially commenced production in August 1943, seamlessly integrated a comprehensively revised intercooler ducting system designed to facilitate substantially improved airflow. Concurrently, it featured ingeniously modified thermostatic controls engineered to remain open for extended durations, particularly under demanding high-power settings. While this factory-implemented solution was not an exact, direct replication of the field modification, Lockheed's meticulous engineers judiciously incorporated their own refinements and maintained superior quality control standards. Nevertheless, the fundamental, core principle remained absolutely identical: to effectively channel a greater volume of cooling air through the critical intercoolers, especially when operating at high altitudes. Beyond these enhancements, the P-38J model also boasted significantly enlarged intercooler cores, providing an impressive 25% more surface area, thereby further optimizing heat rejection capabilities. As a direct consequence of these integrated improvements, the engine output at a challenging altitude of 25,000 feet experienced a dramatic surge, increasing by nearly 200 horsepower when compared to its earlier, less efficient predecessors. The subsequent P-38L variant, which commenced its production rollout in June 1944, advanced these crucial improvements even further, showcasing Lockheed's continued commitment to optimizing performance. For this iteration, Lockheed's engineers meticulously designed entirely new intercooler housings, featuring highly streamlined internal ducting specifically engineered to minimize airflow restriction while concurrently maximizing the volume of air passing through. Additionally, the exit doors were significantly enlarged, and the entire control system underwent a comprehensive redesign, explicitly configured to prioritize optimal cooling efficiency above mere temperature stability. Combat pilots, who had the privilege of transitioning from the earlier model Lightnings to the advanced L variant, consistently reported that, when operating at altitude, the aircraft felt like an entirely different machine, demonstrating a transformative leap in capability. Indeed, the rate of climb to 30,000 feet witnessed an impressive improvement of nearly 30% when compared directly to the original P-38F and G models, which had notoriously struggled with high-altitude performance back in 1942. And here, truly, resides the most poignant and revealing aspect of this entire narrative. When Lockheed's diligent engineers formally presented their significantly improved intercooler system to the discerning Army Air Force technical reviewers in late 1943, they made a remarkable and unreserved concession. They explicitly credited the innovative field modifications for having decisively illuminated the path forward. The official engineering reports, meticulously documented for posterity, openly acknowledged that the unforgiving crucible of combat experience had unequivocally exposed critical limitations inherent in the original design, deficiencies that even the most rigorous peacetime testing protocols had regrettably failed to detect. This moment represented a truly rare and commendable instance of institutional humility, an open admission that resourceful mechanics operating in the demanding North African theater had successfully resolved a complex engineering challenge that Burbank's most brilliant and experienced engineers had, astonishingly, overlooked. By the close of 1944, a formidable fleet of over 4,000 P-38s had been manufactured incorporating these vastly improved intercooler systems, each tracing its direct lineage and foundational principle back to the singular, unyielding determination of one pragmatic mechanic, who steadfastly refused to accept the dictates of the official manual as immutable gospel. The profound tactical implications of this significant change resonated across all operational theaters where P-38 Lightnings were deployed, fundamentally reshaping the strategic deployment of these formidable aircraft in active combat scenarios. Prior to this crucial modification, established military doctrine dictated that P-38s functioned primarily as medium-altitude interceptors, performing optimally and maintaining a competitive edge at elevations below 20,000 feet. However, in the wake of this pivotal upgrade, discerning squadron commanders began strategically assigning Lightnings to critical high-altitude escort missions, roles previously reserved exclusively for the robust P-47 Thunderbolts. A vivid illustration of this transformative shift occurred in August 1943, when a contingent of modified P-38s from the 55th Fighter Group provided vital protection for B-17 bombers targeting Regensburg at a staggering altitude of 30,000 feet, a mission profile that, just 6 months earlier, would have been unequivocally deemed a suicidal endeavor. The most compelling and dramatic validation of this transformative enhancement manifested during the crucial follow-up missions of Operation Torch across North Africa, unfolding throughout the spring and summer of 1943. On May 7th, Captain John Weltman, an intrepid pilot from the 27th Fighter Squadron, piloted a newly modified P-38 while providing bomber escort to Tunis. His flight element encountered a formidable squadron of a dozen Bf-109gs at an altitude of 27,000 feet, their nefarious intent being to execute a swift dive through the protective formation to attack the vulnerable bombers. Weltman's element responded with remarkable alacrity, executing an aggressive climb to intercept, ultimately reaching an astonishing 32,000 feet. This strategic ascent compelled the German fighters to engage at an altitude where the newly enhanced Lightnings now possessed a distinct and decisive advantage. His flight triumphantly claimed 3 confirmed kills, remarkably without suffering the loss of a single bomber. His subsequent after-action report contained a succinct yet profoundly impactful declaration that rapidly circulated through every fighter group in the theater. Aircraft perform beyond expectations at altitude. Modification is combat critical. Across the European theater, this narrative of enhanced performance and strategic advantage was reiterated with varying scenarios, yet consistently culminating in the same conclusive outcome. Major Thomas Lynch, a distinguished ace pilot with the 39th Fighter Squadron operating in the Pacific, recounted a particularly intense engagement with Japanese Ki-43 Oscars at 28,000 feet over the skies of New Guinea in July 1943. While the Oscars were renowned for their exceptional nimbleness and agility, their primary tactical reliance was on their superior climb rate to dictate and control the altitude of engagement. Lynch's modified P-38, demonstrating its newfound prowess, ascended directly through the Japanese formation, effectively scattering their cohesive unit and creating opportune moments for his wingmen to systematically pick off the now separated enemy aircraft. That very night, he meticulously documented in his personal diary, "The Lightning finally does what it was always supposed to do. We own the sky up here now." Statistical analyses from the latter half of 1943 unequivocally underscored this profound transformation in quantifiable metrics. Fighter groups operating the newly modified P-38s reported a remarkable 57% surge in enemy aircraft destroyed during high-altitude engagements, a stark contrast to the performance metrics of the same units in late 1942 and early 1943. More significantly, Bomber loss rates on critical missions escorted by these improved P-38s experienced a substantial reduction of 31%. This translated directly into the preservation of hundreds of invaluable aircrew lives and the safeguarding of billions of dollars in essential aircraft and munitions that successfully reached their intended targets, rather than tragically plummeting from the sky over occupied Europe. Beyond the tangible operational improvements, this critical modification profoundly altered the psychological disposition of the pilots themselves. Interviews conducted with P-38 pilots in 1942 frequently conveyed a palpable sense of frustration and numerous complaints regarding the inherent disadvantages they faced in combat. In stark contrast, interviews conducted from late 1943 onwards radiated an unmistakable aura of confidence and assuredness. Lieutenant William McGuire, an intrepid pilot with the 71st Fighter Squadron, articulated this sentiment to a reporter in October 1943, stating, "6 months ago, I'd see Germans above me and think, 'Here we go again.' Now I see them and think, 'You're already dead. You just don't know it yet.'" This profound psychological shift, this newfound luxury of choosing one's engagements, was the direct benefit of an additional 3,000 feet of climb rate. The narrative of the anonymous mechanic, whose ingenuity sparked this revolution, concludes in the manner of countless enlisted personnel stories, shrouded in obscurity, devoid of official commendations or public recognition. He was rotated back to the continental United States sometime in late 1943, presumably returning to his pre-war occupation of repairing automobiles in his hometown, his name never etched into the annals of history. The Army Air Forces did not bestow Distinguished Service Medals for unauthorized field modifications, regardless of the countless lives they demonstrably saved. His invaluable contribution persists in scattered maintenance logs and after-action reports that allude to improved performance without explicitly identifying the source, and most significantly, in the very survival of pilots who returned home because their engines steadfastly performed at 28,000 feet. Nevertheless, his indelible fingerprints are discernible throughout the tapestry of aviation history, for those discerning enough to perceive them. The P-38's metamorphosis from an altitude-hindered liability to a formidable high-altitude predator irrevocably altered American fighter tactics for the remainder of the conflict. It powerfully validated the principle that practical field experience could, at times, supersede entrenched engineering orthodoxy, a vital lesson that various military branches would recurrently learn, forget, and relearn through subsequent conflicts such as Korea, Vietnam, and every engagement thereafter. When Lockheed embarked on the design of the P-80 Shooting Star, America's inaugural operational jet fighter, the intercooler specifications meticulously incorporated provisions for maximizing airflow under the most arduous combat conditions. These were lessons gleaned from a resourceful mechanic who had never once set foot inside the hallowed Burbank wind tunnel. The broader, overarching lesson extended far beyond the confines of a single aircraft or a solitary modification. While engineers, meticulously working from exhaustive test data and intricate theoretical models, are capable of conceiving and producing truly magnificent machines, these machines are ultimately destined to operate within real-world conditions that peacetime testing programs frequently fail to fully replicate. Such conditions include the sweltering heat of North Africa, the immense psychological strain of combat, and the sustained high-power operations at extreme altitudes. The original design of the P-38 had not, and indeed could not, account for the entirety of these variables. No peacetime test program, however comprehensive, can ever fully simulate the unbridled chaos and unpredictable exigencies of war. This is precisely where the invaluable contributions of mechanics, pilots, and line crew chiefs truly prove their worth, diligently bridging the critical chasm between what the official manual prescribes and what demonstrably functions effectively when lives are on the line and bullets are flying. Modern aviation engineering has, to a significant extent, institutionalized some of the profound lessons imparted by that anonymous mechanic. Formalized field modification programs now exist within official channels, facilitating the rapid implementation of combat-proven improvements. The Air Force, for instance, has established entire organizations specifically dedicated to meticulously harvesting innovations from operational units and rigorously pushing them through accelerated development cycles. Yet, even in the contemporary era, the most groundbreaking innovations frequently originate in the very same manner, with an individual intimately familiar with the hardware who discerns something everyone else has overlooked and possesses the audacious courage to implement a solution that lies outside the prescribed parameters of the official handbook. The P-38 Lightning concluded the Second World War with an exceptionally distinguished combat record. With over 10,000 units manufactured, flown by America's two most decorated aces, instrumental in the pivotal downing of Admiral Yamamoto, and earning the grudging respect of enemies who had initially dismissed its capabilities, its legacy is undeniable. This enduring legacy owes a significant debt to Kelly Johnson's brilliant design, to the diligent Allison engineers, who crafted robust and reliable power plants, and to the thousands of courageous pilots who valiantly fought within its cockpit. However, it also owes an immeasurable debt to a nameless staff sergeant who, observing an engine that was not performing to its full potential, boldly concluded that the manual was not the ultimate authority. Indeed, sometimes the most profoundly impactful innovations do not emanate from the hierarchical apex. Instead, they organically emerge from the ground up, scrawled in greased pencil, and unequivocally proven in the crucible of combat. That unheralded mechanic never fully comprehended the sheer number of lives his ingenious work salvaged, or the far-reaching extent to which his simple idea would ripple through the expansive currents of aviation history. Yet, every single P-38 pilot who successfully returned home from a mission at 30,000 feet understood. And ultimately, that is the only recognition that truly holds any enduring significance.